Hi, Pro-Life Gen. This is Kristen Hawkins, President of Students for Life. Welcome to this new episode of the Explicitly Pro-Life podcast.
The pro-life movement as a whole is striving every day to ensure that no woman in an unexpected pregnancy stands alone.
On August 28th, church leaders around the U.S. are gathering to learn how to support pregnant women in their communities. And here's why. Since Roe v. Wade, women in our country have been lied to. Over 73% of Americans don't know where to find nonviolent pregnancy resources in their own communities, while abortion continues to be promoted and made easily accessible. As we step into a post-Roe America, Christians must be at the forefront of changing this reality and bringing life-affirming resources to pregnant women and their unborn babies. This is where churches can step in. More than half of abortion-seeking women identify as Christian or Catholic and often look to the church for help and guidance. Church leaders must be equipped to bring resources and empowering conversations to the pregnant, new moms, and their communities. Are you ready? Don't miss the nationwide event, Standing With Her Sunday on August 28th, and learn how you can support the most vulnerable in your community, so no woman stands alone.
Today, we're going to be talking about the international pro-life movement. We know we're winning in America, and the other side makes it very clear that we're winning on abortion. But internationally, we have a lot of work to do. So I have brought on Dr. Calum Miller. He's a medical doctor and an international director of an NGO called the Canopy Global Foundation. Dr. Miller is going to join me, and we're going to have a really, I think, informative conversation. Well, I know we'll have a very informative conversation about the state of the pro-life movement across the globe. Dr. Miller graduated from the University of Oxford Medical School in 2015. He currently works as a medical doctor there in the UK. He also teaches philosophy at the University of Oxford, where his research focuses on abortion policy and practice. He holds a master's degree with distinction in biblical studies. He's an international director of Canopy Global Foundation, an international organization dedicated to combat human trafficking, violence against women, and abortion around the world. He's given over 40 academic presentations internationally and has taken part, I'm really kind of jealous, in multiple debates against the CEO of the UK's largest private abortion vendor, BPAS, the British Pregnancy Advisory Service. He's published in top academic venues on a variety of topics, including maternal mortality in the developing world, the ethics of voting on abortion, animal and fetal pain, abortion and mental health, telemedicine abortion, academic freedom, and the philosophy of religion. He has presented to parliamentarians and governments all over the world on abortion, regularly appears in mainstream media in the UK. Not an easy thing to do. I've done it. It's very hostile, and has been invited to speak in various professional groups, including the Association of Obstetricians and Gynecologists of Uganda. Dr. Miller also runs the Abortion Q&A, a comprehensive database of fully referenced pro-life answers to the toughest questions pro-lifers face. I had no idea this existed. Tell me more, Dr. Miller.
Well, thank you. Despite all of that, I'm so privileged, and it's an honor to be on this podcast, which I'm a fan of and listen to. So I'm very grateful for the invitation. I really only became pro-life at medical school, and then since then have kind of gradually got involved and eventually in advocacy, because I think it's one thing to know about this topic and to be pro-life, but if you're not out there defending the most vulnerable humans, then what are you doing with your life?
You were going to be like my best friend. I'm so excited to talk to you. Because I can't tell you how many interviews I have been, doing since the fall of Roe versus Wade. And it's been, well, you can't talk about that because you're not a medical doctor. You don't know anything about this. Where are your credentials? And I'm like, no. Like, there's a lot of doctors. I don't have a doctorate degree. But trust me, I'm not wrong. But it's so refreshing to see somebody of your credentials, your academic credentials, professional credentials, and then to say that you became pro-life in medical school. So like, I know we have to talk about the international pro-life community, which is not going to be a fun topic, I think, in some of these updates you have to give me. But how did you become pro-life in medical school? I'm genuinely very interested.
Yeah, so in the UK, almost no one speaks about this topic. Even in the churches, no one speaks about it ever, really. Like, you wouldn't expect a Christian to be pro-life. So I wasn't brought up in a pro-life family and never really thought about it even until medical school. And it was only really once I was there, looking at the reality of life in the womb, looking at the reality of abortion, seeing the impact of abortion on women, and really thinking through the arguments. I was given an opportunity at Oxford to expose myself to new ideas, and I did. And it really hit home that abortion was obviously not good for women and obviously not good for babies, and that both women and their children deserve better. So I really, became involved. Didn't do much for a couple of years, just argued on Facebook, which was a waste of time. But eventually, got much more involved in more useful things, and have been really glad to be in the pro-life movement, even despite some of the hostility that I get.
I mean, you're such a rare bird, because you said you went to college to be exposed to new ideas. I mean, that's like revolutionary thinking. Like, who even thinks that anymore, right? You go to the college to be indoctrinated by your professors and be entrenched in liberal viewpoint. So no, this is, okay, we are going to be fast friends. You just need to come over here. We need you over in America too. Okay, so, oh my gosh, there's so many questions. I want to talk to you about maternal mortality, because that's, a big thing that is always used as a justification for killing human life, which doesn't make any sense. Like, women die in pregnancy, so let's just kill babies. Like, it's, oh, don't you think we can do better? But I do want to get to why we asked you to come on today, specifically to give some of your insights working internationally, what's happening in the pro-life movement. Because I think we talk a lot here on the Explicitly Pro-Life podcast. I mean, all the time about the American pro-life movement. We rarely ever talk about the international pro-life movement. What is the general picture of debate around the world when it comes to abortion? Are most people and most countries pro-life or pro-abortion? What's the general direction everything's going in?
Yeah, so it's kind of a fascinating dynamic in that there's such a variety of opinion, but it's true to say that most people around the world are pro-life. And, we often feel in the minority because people don't want to speak up, especially in the West. But the majority of people in the world agree with us and are pro-life. The majority of countries have pretty strong restrictions on abortion. But this is changing pretty quickly. So there was a report published a couple of years ago showing from 2008 to 2019, over 10 years, 27 countries removed protections for unborn children in their law, and not a single country put in really substantive protections in law over a decade. And so it's a really frightening prospect and a frightening direction of travel, which, as I say, is kind of going against what the majority of people actually think. Now, we know, of course, that the pro-life population in some ways is growing because pro-life countries have a much higher fertility rate and a birth rate, and pro-abortion countries are falling in population. And this is a big worry for the other side. But nevertheless, this is a really worrying trend that we're seeing. And I think if we don't pay attention to the global perspective, we might end up in a situation where, given the direction of travel, the US is the only pro-life country. And, of course, turning the US back to a pro-life country would be a huge, huge achievement, thanks to your organization and others. But I think if it ends up that that's the only pro-life country, I think even the US will really struggle. And so I think the global perspective is critical.
How much do you think, in that 10-year period were our tax dollars, American taxpayers, responsible for these countries adopting these pro-abortion laws and standards?
I think it plays a huge, huge role. And, speaking to people who have worked in the American government or did work in the American government or have seen the American government at work in other countries, it's absolutely clear that the American government has a huge role in this. And at the moment, of course, for the worse and to the detriment of countries worldwide. So we see pressure, often bordering on illegal pressure and blackmail. We see a lot of pressure from the US, from Western Europe, from the United Nations, basically saying, if you don't legalize abortion, we will withdraw our support for you, we will withdraw life-sustaining aid, and we will really make things very difficult for your country, often in countries that have huge amounts of poverty and difficulty and desperately need the support of the international community. So it's really a sort of sinister kind of blackmail that we see. But of course, it means that the US has a major role in this globally. And really, of course, we hope that that it will change to have a major role defending life rather than trying to destroy it.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that, I think it was in 2012 in Kenya. We threatened to withhold all aid to Kenya when they were rewriting their constitution unless they put the right to abortion. This is why when pro-lifers here in America, we say vote pro-life first, and the liberal pro-lifers who don't like the Republican who's pro-life running will say, it doesn't matter, politics doesn't matter. It absolutely matters, because whoever the president appoints to head up the Department of State, who is the director of USAID, the Agency of International Development, those personnel decisions that are made, there's all this tax money that flows that we, as the most generous nation in the world, give out from our tax dollars to these developing countries, whether for good or bad. There's a lot of debate about whether that works. We actually put stipulations on that money, just like what you said. It's like blackmail of, oh, you would like to feed your children? Oh, you got to write abortion into your constitution so you can kill your children. It's absolutely sickening. So let's start with Europe. That's where you're at full time. That's where you live, you work. As far as I can tell from the conversations we've had with European pro-life student leaders who've come over here to our national summit, or we've had conversations with, it seems to be a very, very hostile place to the pro-life movement. What's it like being a pro-lifer in Europe, and have you found any signs of hope there?
Yeah, it is tough. And, I'm very much unusual in becoming pro-life in Europe, especially in the medical profession. But at the same time, most Europeans are pro-choice, and the large majority of people in the UK are pro-choice, probably 95%. But actually, they're much more moderate in many ways than some of the American pro-abortion activists. So in Europe, no country has third trimester abortion on demand. And only a handful of countries, maybe 3 countries, have abortion beyond 14 weeks. So the large majority of Europe absolutely believes that abortion should be restricted after the first trimester. And there's only a couple of exceptions to that. And when you ask people in the street, do you agree with late-term abortion? Do you agree with what Roe v. Wade actually says? Most people are horrified. So we don't have quite the same level of extremism that there is in North America or parts of North America. But as you say, it's mostly hostile. There are only a few pro-life countries like Malta, and Poland is mostly pro-life, and a couple of other very, very small countries, and that's pretty much it. But what we have seen is that despite all that hostility and despite the fact that most people are against us, we do see some signs of hope. So as an example, there were a couple of doctors in the UK who were prescribing abortion pill reversal to prevent abortions after the woman has taken the first abortion pill. And, these pro-abortion activist groups investigated them. They wrote hit pieces on the media against them. They got the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. They got the abortion providers all to complain to the medical regulators about these doctors. And so the medical regulators investigated these doctors. But when they actually investigated the doctors, one of those doctors took the matter to court and said, let's look at the evidence. This is an unjustified investigation. And what they found was that both of the expert witnesses, one on the side of the doctor, one on the side of the medical regulator, both of them were pro-abortion. Both expert witnesses said abortion pill reversal is safe and abortion pill reversal is probably effective. And so what we actually managed to achieve from that campaign of persecution against pro-lifers was we actually got neutral or even pro-abortion experts in the field to uphold the validity of abortion pill reversal. Likewise, with telemedicine abortion, pills in the post, we have a case where in the UK, our government initially decided to get rid of it after COVID because it was so dangerous. They saw the evidence and they said, this is not safe. We had the Royal College of Pediatrics who said, this is not safe for children. They are having babies at home with no medical supervision in the 3rd trimester. And this is horrendous. And so we had a lot of pro-choice, pro-abortion medical authorities come out against telemedicine saying it's not safe. And so although we have this, general hostility, we do have some signs that some of our work has been effective in convincing people of some of the extremism of the other side.
What about Africa? What have you been hearing about what's going on there in Africa? I mean, I know what we've done as Americans to some of these countries, forcing them to adopt a Western version of our morality, which is kill your child if your child's inconvenient. But what have you heard happening within the pro-life movement there in Africa?
Yeah, it's a fascinating continent, and of course, there's such diversity within Africa. So I don't want to treat it as if it's all the same, but we do see, of course, that there's a huge amount of blackmail against African countries because so many of them are dependent on aid from the West, and so this has caused, huge difficulty because the UN, America, Canada, Western Europe all basically blackmail African countries and say we will withdraw that support, that life-sustaining support in some cases, unless you legalize abortion. In some cases, we see African countries legalizing abortion with no public debate. A couple of months ago, we saw the West African country of Benin legalize abortion. Everyone just woke up, found on the daily news feed that it had legalized abortion, and no one had a clue. And it's really because of this pressure from outside without any sort of public debate, going against the will of the people who, 90% plus of African people in sub-Saharan Africa are pro-life. And yet the pressure against them, which is a form of colonialism, really, to legalize abortion has just been so overwhelming that it's in a very difficult position.
Wow, that's terrible. And it's in the level of guilt that we have as Americans for some of this blackmail is just, it's absolutely terrible. What about okay, so I'm going around the world here, so I'm getting my globe. What about Islamic countries? There's 2 billion plus Muslims in the world. What are we doing? And because I have heard, we have had over the years some Muslim students for life leaders, for example. What are we hearing? Because I get conflicting information from Muslims that I talk to about abortion all the time.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of confusion about the Islamic perspective on abortion, and it leads many people, including many Muslims, to think that abortion is fine in the early stages of pregnancy. And I feel slightly odd saying this as someone who's not a Muslim. The Islamic position is actually pretty clear. It says that the baby has a soul at a particular point, and they disagree about when that point is. But after that point, they consider abortion murder. And that's pretty much universal within Islamic theology and jurisprudence. But before that point, they don't think abortion is okay. They think it's still wrong and only okay in the most extreme circumstances. They just don't think it's specifically murder. And so when you actually look at the Islamic teaching, it's very clear that 95% of abortions, or more than 95% actually, would be against Islamic teaching. And that's why in the Islamic world, abortion is almost entirely prohibited and unborn babies are protected. And so because they have a bit more wealth in many of those countries, they're a bit more resistant to the pressure from the West. And so,
yeah, I don't see Joe Biden going over to UAE or Saudi Arabia and being so outraged that they don't have abortion. Yeah, he's so outraged as a Republican extremist here in America. It's fascinating how that happens.
yeah, I mean, they go for countries they think they own, and they go for countries they think they can tell what to do, and they can't do that as much in the Middle East, although they still try. And so, yeah, absolutely. I think the Islamic world is in a stronger position, but I think it's important we know what the Islamic teaching is, because, as you say, there are 2 billion Muslims in the world, and they are mostly on our side, at least when they know what their faith teaches.
What about Asia? I mean, I've spoken with a lot of folks over the past year about the Chinese Communist Party's, democide and genocide against the Uyghur. Their one-child policy, now their two-child policy. What do we hear, or what are you hearing, I guess, about the pro-life movement, whether it's in India or, Korea, South Korea, Japan? What are you hearing there?
Yeah, my sense, and again, not wishing to be, just make generalizations about a continent that I'm not from. It does seem like
here.
the it really does seem as if the pro-life movement there is a lot more limited. And I think a big reason for that is because most of the pro-life movement around the world is Christian. That's not because you need to be Christian to be pro-life. I didn't become pro-life because of Christian beliefs. I became pro-life because I knew basic science and I believed in human equality. But in most of the world, the pro-life movement is a large majority Christian, and there are far fewer Christians in Asia. Now, there are many, maybe as many as 100 million Christians in China, but there's still the small minority and a very heavily persecuted minority, especially in China, subject to forced abortions, as we all know. So, yeah, the movement in Asia does seem to be smaller and seems to have a lot less political weight. But on the other hand, you have all these traditions in the Asian and Eastern religions, which are generally protective of life. One of the most famous things about Buddhism is that it is against killing. And likewise, Hinduism, when you look at what it teaches, it's quite a diverse religion, but the basic tenets, again, would be against abortion pretty clearly. And so you do generally have a respect for life. And when you look at the opinion polls from most of Asia, most people are pro-life in most of those countries. In China and India, it's maybe a bit more 50-50. But there is a lot of pro-life sentiment, which again, of course, is being ignored by the West, and abortion is being pushed on these countries, often in a very eugenic way or in a way that promotes population control, because, of course, we can't have too many people from India on the planet, because that would be disastrous for the West. We have to give them as much abortion and sterilization as we can. That really has been the mentality for the last 50 years from the West.
Absolutely has been the mentality. I've been hearing there's been more and more news stories in the past couple of years about what's been happening in Latin America, specifically in Mexico, and what's happened in Argentina, where they fought to legalize abortion. Then one of their main leaders actually died from a legal abortion there in Argentina. What can we take that's happening in Latin America? Good? Is it good movement, or is it bad movement there in Latin America?
So Latin America has huge pro-life movements and a huge number of pro-lifers, and they've done some really incredible work. This is true all over the world. Pro-lifers have been doing incredible work, but Latin America has a really, really huge developed movement. Mm-hmm. It still doesn't have the same funding as the other side, of course. It has nowhere near the funding of the other side or the international support, but it has a lot of passionate pro-life people doing incredible work. What I think Latin America has particularly struggled from is what America struggled from in the 70s, which is judicial activism. And so just in the last few months, we saw the Colombian Supreme Court equivalent basically say that abortion is a right, and abortion is to be permitted until the very latest stages of pregnancy for any reason at all. And most people in Colombia are pro-life. They even signed the Geneva Consensus Declaration. This was a declaration, an international declaration of about 30 to 40 countries, saying that abortion is not a human right. We support women's health and we support children's health, and this doesn't include abortion, and countries have the right to choose their own laws on abortion. So Colombia signed that, and yet their court has said abortion has to be allowed until the very latest stages of pregnancy. Likewise, in Mexico, their Supreme Court has done the same thing, and even crazier stuff than that. You can find information about that online. And so what we really see in Latin America is bad leadership, often from political leaders, often from judges, really doing what they did in America in the 1970s. And so, no matter how many pro-lifers you have, there's only so much you can do when a few, usually men, take it upon themselves to legalize abortion up to birth across the country. So there is much to fight for in Latin America, and certainly some of these things can be turned back or moved forward to a pro-life future. But it has really suffered from those sorts of political and judicial extremists in recent years.
So the misogyny of abortion continues on. That's the takeaway there. I think what you've just kind of underscored to me, and kind of going across the globe and giving me the short summary of what's happening in the pro-life movement, is, I think, to me, it underscores the importance of what we're doing here in America. How do you feel that the American Supreme Court's reversal of Roe versus Wade, what do you think the impacts are going to be worldwide?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I was initially kind of skeptical, because I've seen how coercive the West has been in other countries, and just how much power the media has and the UN has. And of course, Roe v. Wade won't change the media or the UN. In fact, it makes them even worse, because they get angry and take it out on the rest of the world. And so I was kind of skeptical, but actually I have been hearing from different countries and, leaders in different countries saying the overturning of Roe v. Wade has really showed us that this is not a settled issue, and that you can be a developed country with a good human rights record and a world leading country that protects women and children. What a surprise. Who would have thought that? But it really has been making a cultural difference, and has been hugely helpful. I would say that the US has a huge role to play. I mean, I think over 95% of the pro-life resources in the world are in the US. Like the US's pro-life movement is multiple times bigger than the rest of the world's pro-life movement combined. And I think it has an absolutely crucial role.
Why do you think that is? I have my own reasons, but I want to hear you. Why do you think that is?
It's a fascinating question. I think part of it is pro-life movements usually grow in defense and in a reactive way. So they only generate themselves once abortion is going to be legalized or has been legalized. And so generally the West has bigger pro-life movements. But the US has done particularly well, I think, because of a higher Christian population. I think because of a more generous population that gives more money to charity and gives more money to people in need, and that takes philanthropic and humanitarian causes really seriously. And I think a number of other reasons. It's had good teaching on abortion. People know or many people know the reality of abortion. They talk about it. They encourage others to be pro-life. And that's been hugely important.
I think it's kind of you can say I'm bragging on America, but it's our exceptional ability to be stubborn and gritty and not do the polite thing, which is, well, I disagree, but I'm going to be silent. Like, no, we are going to continue to argue this. We're going to continue to hash this out. We're going to continue to talk about this. I think that's been significant. But I was so glad to hear what you said. I got a little excited. I started putting my fist in the air because this has been the point all along of, I've heard this, especially from evangelical Christians here in the States, of reversing Roe doesn't do anything. Women are still going to be in danger. We still need to be serving women. Well, of course, duh. Like, no one said we're not. But reversing Roe changes the culture. And it sets an example across the world, across the globe, that you can walk back the tragedy of abortion, that we can make good on the egregious wrong that was Roe versus Wade. So, okay, before I let you go, I need to ask you the hard question. I get asked this all the time. And since you've got the credentials, not me, I think you should answer this. The number one argument I hear for why abortion must be legal in the developing world, why, our very own president says this all the time, President Biden, that why abortion must be legal here in America is that if it's not, women will die of back alley abortions if abortion isn't, quote unquote, safe and legal in that country. Maternal mortality will skyrocket. What do you make of this argument?
Yeah, it is a challenging argument, especially, when you haven't looked into it much. I'm not saying you haven't, of course, I know you have, but for other pro-lifers who may not have looked into it, it is initially challenging. And I think the reason for that is because everyone can have compassion and feel devastated at the loss of women losing their lives as a result of abortion. I think, all pro-lifers think that's horrible and would do anything they could to stop it within the bounds of ethics and human rights. Mm-hmm. But I think actually, I've looked at this question probably more than any other question in the last 2 years. I've written thousands and thousands of words on it. And so I'll try and keep it short and try and summarize. I think most pro-lifers are going to say something like, whatever the consequences of legalizing or banning abortion, you have to keep it illegal because these are human rights at stake. And you have to protect the vulnerable no matter what the consequences are. And I think that's true. And we've seen that in other circumstances. When the slave trade was at its peak in the late 18th century, people who were defending the slave trade said the same thing. They said, we should keep it legal because if you make it illegal, the conditions will become so much worse. People will crowd too many slaves onto ships. They will have far worse conditions, and it will be worse for the slaves if it's made illegal. And of course, regardless of whether that's true or not, we have an inherent sense that this is just wrong. It has to be outlawed because it is a gross violation of human rights. But I think we can actually go a lot further because we kind of almost accept or implicitly accept the pro-abortion talking point there, which is that legalizing abortion will make it safer. And actually, the research I've done in the last couple of years has shown that that is simply not true. I've looked at about 30 countries from all across the world, in Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean, Europe, Canada, everywhere, and looked at what happened when they legalized abortion. And I haven't found a single case of a country that has legalized abortion and seen fewer people dying from abortion as a result. In fact, in some cases, more people do. In places like the Netherlands, in Rwanda, in Ethiopia, there's a spike in women having dangerous abortions and dying as a result when it's legalized because it makes it normal and it causes more abortions to happen. Whereas by contrast, all the countries that have banned abortion in recent history, whether that's Poland in the 1990s or El Salvador or Chile, or whether it's earlier in history, Hungary or East Germany, whenever a country has banned abortion, fewer abortions have happened, and they have seen a decrease in maternal mortality, and they've seen a decrease in women dying from abortions. And so one of the best ways to stop women from dying from backstreet abortions is to clamp down on them and try and stop them from happening. And so just in closing, the last thing I'll say on that, when you actually look at the reality, what you find is women dying from illegal abortions is mostly to do with how the healthcare system operates. If you have a poor country with lack of healthcare infrastructure like South Africa or India or Bangladesh, all of those countries have legal abortion, but they have many women dying from abortion because they don't have the emergency services available. But if you have good healthcare like Malta or Poland, it's unheard of for women to die from backstreet abortions. Malta and Poland have the lowest maternal mortality rates in the entire world. Better than the UK, better than France, better than Germany, way better than the United States of America under Roe versus Wade.
Wow, that's significant. That's something that every pro-lifer, I think, needs to rewind this podcast and listen to all these stats and this truth that you just laid out, because this is something I know continues to come up, and I think is, a starting block for many of us to have our conversations here in America about what's going on with maternal mortality rates and why we're seeing, high maternal mortality rates in certain demographics across our nation. But that certainly isn't a justification. And as you've just pointed out, it's not a justification for more violence, for more abortion. Calum, thank you so much for joining me today and for giving us all of this truth and this update with everything that's happening internationally. I can't hold it all in my head, so I'm glad somebody like you can. How can folks follow you and your work and your research to continue to get educated, on the international pro-life issue, as well as maternal mortality and all the research that you're conducting?
Yeah, I'd really encourage people to firstly look at my blog, calumsblog.com, calumsblog.com, where we have a complete database looking at every question people can ask about pro-life, about abortion, and it has all the latest evidence from pro-choice, pro-abortion, or neutral sources. It's fully backed up with the best scientific evidence. Anyone who's interested in the international side of things, I'd really encourage you to look at canopyglobal.org.
Canopyglobal.org.
We're an organization that fights human trafficking, violence against women, and abortion, because we know that all of these hurt women. And we do that all over the world, working with people in the most deprived countries and the most marginalized people, really to protect them from those things. And so anyone with an interest in this work globally, we'd really love to hear from you and to see how we can work together.
Yeah, calumsblog.com is amazing. I'm just looking at now and just keeps going on and on. So I'm going to be checking it out. Thanks, Calum, for your time today. Thanks for joining us. Thank you all for tuning in for this important discussion about the international pro-life movement. And I think this has been very eye-opening for all of us to know just how important our work is here in America, for not only will it mean lives saved and women spared the violence of abortion here in America, but it means it's going to help transform the pro-life movement internationally as well.